So you said that before we started rolling the cameras that you were the underground guy for like 20 years, right?
Yeah.
Now you're the front and center guy.
Yeah.
When did that happen?
When I got hurt.
Gotcha.
I don't know if you know that story, and I don't really love to tell that story, but December 2013, I was crippled. How about that? I was in a crippling accident, and it caused me to change everything because literally it changed everything.
What happened? If you don't mind, you don't have to, but
I'll give you a very condensed version.
Sure.
I was training with a friend of mine who is a pro wrestler. Not that makes him a bad egg, but that makes him tall. And we squatted, and I think we did. It was a goofy workout. I think we actually deadlifted, then squatted, and we were finishing up with some leg presses. And it was an old leg press, one that I actually like, but to rack the sled in the low position was lowish for me and impossible for him. And to rack the sled in the top position was borderline impossible for me. So it was kind of not the piece of equipment we should have been using, but we did. And because I was stronger than him and probably a little more reckless than him, we would rack it in the top position, and I would have to basically do a ballistic repetition and slap the handles in. And that worked until it didn't. And I was fully extended, toes all out in like plie position, and handle slapped in and then slapped out. And whatever it was, fucking 1,100 pounds or some nonsense, just came straight down, and my feet basically just rolled up. And I broke, literally, when I say this, people think I'm being hyperbolic, but I'm not. This is a genuine statement. I broke every bone in both of my feet.
Fuck.
And, mayhem from there. Was told, the surgeon was actually the ER surgeon, who did the surgery. It was actually an acquaintance of mine, and he told me basically just preparatory. He's like, you're probably not going to walk again. And he said, if you do, you're going to walk with a severe limp. So that was how my 2014 started, was wheelchair bound.
And then does that propel into your question? So after that, something happened?
Well, I mean, that changed everything because I was no longer, competitive. I was no longer mobile. I was no longer a lot of things. At the time, I had no idea how long I was even going to be in the wheelchair. It wound up being about 9 months. So, I basically had to start. I don't even want to say I was so clever. It's like I had to build infrastructure from this chair. I had to fucking basically fill my fucking hours. Like, you can only do so many fucking wheelies in the living room, and then you're like, well, maybe it's time to fucking do something. And that led me to, the podcasting, and that's, of course, a public thing, sort of. You're sitting there talking to a phone, but potentially thousands or tens of thousands of people see it, and that's what led me down the road of kind of having a public face to kind of answer the question you asked.
Yeah, because you are unrelenting with your social media, podcasts, video content. You've been doing it for a long time, right? So did that injury sort of was that concurrent with when you started that process?
That completely started it. Yeah. I did nothing prior to that. I had nothing, but very shockingly little. Prior to 2013, only people that needed to know who I was knew who I was.
Yeah. Did that injury propel you with any of your injury research? Because that's something I wanted to touch base on today. I think I've heard you talk before about growth hormone and healing peptides, and I think it's really eloquent. And I was telling Alex I would love to just kind of get you to run us through that today. But did you getting that injury? Did that head you down that path?
Well, I mean, no, further for sure, in a much more precise and concise and crash course, manifestation. Osteo development isn't the burning need on most athletes' plates, so it's something I knew about as a topic, but did I know about it in detail? No. Soft tissue, yes, that's considerably more relevant to powerlifters, throwers, etc., American football players. So, that was definitely an area that I had knowledge, but then, much like, my wife recently had a bout of cancer, and it was just that same sort of thing where I'm like, I'll be back, and I go to the library and take every book they have on cancer and read them front to back 4 times over and, start a stack of notes. And within, 4 weeks, I'm asking the oncologist questions that they don't have answers to. So that's just how I operate, unfortunately. I have a very vast capacity for learning, but a relatively narrow interest if left alone. If that isn't...
You need a prompt of a sort.
An impetus for sure.
I want to get back to that question, but that question on learning is really important because you seem obsessive in the way you learn, and I wonder if that's just a natural thing, because learning is so important, and how you learn and how you communicate your learnings. Is there anything you would pass on to strategies, techniques, things that you have done to almost, like PED steroid your learning capacity?
Well, those exist, by the way.
Please share.
No, I'm not even being facetious.
Cognition and
100%.
memory. Yeah.
It's a subject that I don't love to love. Good friend of mine, Alex Kiekel, and Andrew Triana, both are considerably more obsessed. Actually, they are obsessed with it. I actually kind of shit on it as a rule. But those sorts of drugs certainly exist. Caffeine has a certain psychoactive capacity. Stepping up that, you can move into modafinil, ardafinil, fluorinated modafinil. Then there's actual neurologically upregulatory peptides like Celanc and Cmax, and there's loads of things that can improve the way the brain works. The problem is they need to be paired very, very carefully with strategies, much like steroids. Steroids work, but if you just sit around and take steroids, they work poorly. But paired with the proper variety of training, they work better and better and better. And if you're training your nutrition and your drug use is very precise, you get very precise outcomes. People can run 100 meters in 9.5 seconds. The problem with the learning peptides is most people are shit, practice shit, and then take drugs to learn shit.
Right.
And it's zero benefit, if any benefit at all. It might be negative.
So let's go back then to not learn like shit, to build a foundation of good learning capacity. Do you have anything that you would say?
I have a way. Is it the way, a best way? Is that I don't know. I have a methodology. Again, I hate to even talk about this shit, but I really do. I find it awkward and but I sit here before you, as a public speaker, as a speaker. Almost no one knows this, but I was born with a hideous speech impediment. I could not speak.
Really?
100%. I struggled terribly to speak. And I was raised by my grandparents, who were wonderful people, but they were ignorant. They were just old and uneducated and they weren't part of the modern world in the 1970s, much less any other time. And I had one decent thought on the topic outside of frustration, and that was people on the radio get paid to talk. They must be kind of good at it. And from that childlike thought, I basically gave myself speech pathology by sitting in their basement in front of this giant tube radio with a horsehair front, listening to the only thing that it would get in terms of reception, which was PBS, which I don't know if it's here, but in America, PBS is rebroadcast from the UK. So I'm sitting in a basement in my German-speaking grandparents' home, listening to British diction, British language, trying to fucking repeat it, and horribly at first, and better over time. And so the process of learning was an absolute necessity to me. It wasn't something that I had an option. I had to learn how to do this. And so learning was just a thing that became very, very just religious and dogmatic and something else. And I hate to be like that old guy. I don't ever want to be that old, like get off of my lawn guy. But it occurred to me very early that learning's hard. It's fucking hard. You have to. It's a job. You have to do it. It's not a thing that just not fucking osmosis that it just enters your head. You have to do it. And so I approach it in that fashion. It's a thing that I do. It's part of my job. If not, it is my job. It went from learning to speak to learning to have something to fucking speak about. And that's how I do. On a base level. Now, like, I could show you my notes and things. I have a way of learning that I've developed, was nudged along by some professors and things, that if I had to name it, and I don't like naming things, but I've actually said this to my assistant and others, that I think of my way of learning as distillation. I take gross, giant pieces of information, and I weed out all the shit that I think is not important, and then I have something more concise, and I ignore it for a bit. Then I come back and I take out what I think is still extraneous, and I just consistently ignore, distill until I get it down to a fucking Post-it note. And I'm like, oh, that's gold. And then I stick it over here.
Okay.
And then I go on to the next batch of shit. I do that.
From complex to simple.
Yeah, and it's just a constant state of distilling till I have just all these Post-it notes that literally could wind up as a book titled Post-it Note Nutrition, which I have written.
Yeah, which you've got.
That's a plug.
No, it's not. It's not really a plug.
No,
it's
good
just
in a good way.
It's just an explanation
You
of
solved
how
the
I
problem.
got to that.
Yeah, exactly.
So that is probably a meandering way to answer the things you asked.
It answered it. Thank you. But I want to hear. About these peptides for healing soft tissue injuries.
Yeah, well, I mean, so after you got injured, like you said, it's different type of injury than what we're sort of like seeing and dealing with more often than not. But you've, as I sort of mentioned before, you've spoken about these a lot, and I think the way that you do it is very eloquent. You know what I mean? So, like, maybe for the benefit of Alex over here, could you run us through, like, just maybe some of the, the way that the growth hormone, for instance, works in the body, and BPC 157, TB 500, like, just gives a bit of an overview of what that might look like from an injury healing perspective.
Were you like a mechanistic?
Yeah.
Well, the first thing that people need to understand is each one of these things have their own mechanism. And I'll briefly touch that. But the more important thing is nothing within you is an isolated consideration. That's the problem people run into with steroids, with anything, even with diet. There is no one thing because everything plays on another thing. And every time you move one thing, 5 other things in the background move subtly. And if they move subtly enough times, they could be somewhere wildly different than where you think they are. It's not this sort of thing like a mixing board where you can just set a setting and then ignore it until you choose to change it. Imagine if you had this giant mixing board of knobs and dials, and every time you turned this one, 5 others unknown to you moved a little bit. Now, how hard would that be to manipulate? So that's what you have to understand in the bigger picture. These people that give you these finite, this is the answer, they're fucking lying or wrong or both.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but that's the answer. And I will tell them so. Anyone who stands on a box and gives you a finite. Now, is that an excuse to just be wishy-washy? No, but you have to know the bounds of your bounds. So, now, the reason I bring up how interplayed they are is they are in fact interplayed, and each one has its own mechanism of action, but if you can tier them correctly, the mechanisms of action overlay in a beneficial format. And the master item in that conversation is growth hormone. Interestingly to the name, and I point this out every time I lecture, growth hormone's name has been changed. It was not originally called growth hormone because it really doesn't do growth. It was called somatropic hormone, which is more indicative of hormone produced in the brain during sleep, which is pretty much what it fucking is. I don't know exactly why the names were changed. Probably because of childhood fetal development is ultimately the response for the osteogrowth. But anyway. But when growth hormone is administered, whether it's endogenous or exogenous, most of what it does, if not all of what it initially does, is not growth, but preparatory. It communicates with tissues and makes them more receptive in some way, depending on the tissue, for future plasticity changes. So if you have a muscle surface or a connective tissue or something, growth hormone comes along and communicates and in some way prepares it for growth. In the case of muscle, it upregulates stem cells and satellite cells and nuclei and gets them very prepared for future growth. It's like having site work done on a construction site. It does the site work, didn't build shit, but it put up the little fence and it got everything ready for the workers to arrive. And as unimportant and uninteresting as that sounds, try and build something on an unprepared surface. It's actually impossible. So it's really the fundamental thing. So you need to have this baseline of growth hormone is in play, it's doing its thing. And then, unfortunately, now you have a secondary player to growth hormone, which is kind of growth hormone's metabolic helper, which is insulin, which needs to be in play, whether it's driven through food or exogenous. So the two of them have a synergy to get their shit done. Then once their shit's done and you have these prepared surfaces and growth-ready tissue surfaces, now you can individually target the tissues for the variety of growth you want by applying, IGF-1, MGF, there's multiple mechanogrowth factors. There's and then TB500 and BPC, which are slightly different but still similar, and they need that preparatory action. But the whole recovery peptide thing is actually really vast. For instance, a mechanogrowth factor would sort of, if you think of muscle as a chicken wire lattice with dense plaster on it, the chicken wire is the reticulin, elastin, structural, rough endoplasmic reticulum, all that shit. Mechanogrowth factor can actually stimulate the growth of that. So now it's not really healing a tissue, but it's reinforcing the structure that you're constantly building on and making bigger. So there's like layers and layers to this. There's preparatory recovery, there's post-damage recovery, there's post-exercise recovery. There's all these layers, if that matters.
Yeah, and I've heard you speak about it before. Like you mentioned before about like whether we're driving insulin through endogenous or exogenous, and this kind of like goes to play with like just the calorie content, I suppose, during this period. Like it would obviously be something which, if you're relying upon that endogenously, like we wouldn't be thinking about being in big deficits whilst trying to make this recovery.
Right. Absolutely. You again, think about childhood. Do children grow well if they're starved? As stupid and obvious as that statement is, it fucking parlays right through all of things. Truncate developmental energy, you truncate overall growth, height, body mass, etc. Doesn't play any different. The magnitude of surplus maybe isn't quite so significant, but nonetheless, the principles are exactly the same.
Do you have a bit of insights into that magnitude, like of surplus? Like, do you sort of have that conversation with the,
I had that conversation endlessly, and everyone walks away from that conversation frustrated because they want an answer, and there isn't. The answer is dependent on age, race, sex, how far above baseline that individual is, how, just because of conditions, how plastic that individual remains.
Yeah.
Homeostasis is a very, very powerful thing, and if you fall into too deep a level of it, you lose a level of biological plasticity.
Yeah, look, I can tell you, like even like with my experiences with clients, like a lot of the time you'll have someone who is in some kind of preparation phase where perhaps they've got a show or some event on and they really need to be in this caloric deficit, but they've got this injury they're dealing with, and there's kind of like this immovable event. Yep. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, we're going to rub it up against reality. Like what can we do? And we're just going to do what we can. And then another one, and this is probably maybe a little bit more with the gen pop than athletes, is if you're injured, you don't get to do a lot of training. You don't get to do a lot of training. You don't want to get fat. And so they're kind of like fighting this, request to increase calories to heal. Go, listen, you're just going to have to bite the bullet here and realize if we're going to recover from this, we need a certain amount of time allocated towards recovery. Right. And you need to take that idea of like staying thick skin lean right now and just, put it off to the side.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, that brings up a whole separate conversation that, again, I don't even like to have. But I really briefly, I'd say most people's both expectations and realities are so wildly removed from one another. I think most Gen Pop people are way too fat. Most bodybuilders are way too lean, and they're just the realities are so separated. It's just not even a conversation I like to have.
Yeah. Do you think that's a divergence that you've seen get worse over time? You know, with these expectation versus reality.
I don't know, because I don't pay attention. I don't care. Yeah. I don't talk to regular people. That's the thing. People always bring up Gen Pop, and I'm like, who are these fucking people? And why do you even care about them? I don't know, and I don't want more relevant. I don't want to know. Yeah. I think they would just cloud up my worldview.
Yeah.
But the context for you, for those listening, who are mostly Gen Pop, your context is athletes, right? No.
My context. Personally, my interest personally is the motivated. I don't care if you compete in the Olympics.
Gen Pop
or
can be motivated.
Dance around your fucking house. It's the people you're talking about are not motivated. I'm talking about people that would fucking knife their uncle to get where they want to be. I'm talking about people that are motivated.
Okay.
People that will walk 15 fucking miles in the rain to get to the gym to do the hard shit I'm telling them to do. That's fucking motivated. Not I have $100, tell me what to do. No. Fuck, I'll kick those people down the stairs. Fuck that.
As you should.
Fuck.
Fair enough. Okay, so you delineate the difference between Gen Pop and just the savages, the people who are fully committed and dedicated to the goal and the outcome. So to go back a little bit, to go growth hormone, is there a minimalist and maximalist approach you have, or you don't even think that way? It's just you need to do this in order to repair this soft tissue injury, this or nothing.
No, that's a terrible way to look at it. And people love to do that. People love, what do IFBB pros take? And I'm like, why do you care? That's like asking how much antibiotic does the guy dying of tuberculosis need? Well, like, what are you planning on getting tuberculosis? Like, why do you fucking care? Like, you need the amount you need. And that's it. That's how drugs work. You need the amount you need. So it's a case by case. It's based on body mass, magnitude of injury, magnitude of investment. There are people out there that can literally get everything they need out of one IU. And then there's literally people that cannot buy enough growth hormone to accomplish their fucking goals. It's how much you need. I mean, the joke around the office is growth hormone falls under the hookers and lawyers clause in most athletes' contracts. And that clause literally is more is always better, more is always more fun, more always gives you a better outcome, and more is always expensive, and more always requires more lawyers. That's what that clause says.
Same applies for drugs.
As a rule.
Right. And then as you age, I wanted to ask you, Broderick, how do you think about the trade-off between dosages, compounds, as you age, and longevity, if you care about it, or quality of life?
Again, this begs me to tell a story that, again, I don't really want to tell, but I started using drugs at age 16. I was exposed to them essentially from day one. So from age 10 to age 16, I knew this was a thing. I knew very roughly what it cost in an ever-growing sense. But from day one, I knew it was a thing. I knew it was a dangerous thing. I knew it was almost certainly in my future, that sort of thing. At age 16, I literally looked in a bathroom mirror and spoke aloud a deal to the devil. And I literally said, if I take these things, travel the world, lift weights, do all the shit I want to do, and can live to 40, that's a fair trade. And I basically shook on that. I turned 51 yesterday. Every single day when I wake up, if I am able to fucking sleep, which usually I'm not, every single morning when I wake up, my first reaction is, nuh-uh.
You're just cheating life.
So,
Yeah.
Again, that's not the response people expect. They expect, a certain repentance, and I have none. Not a fucking drop.
So I got to ask you then, because like at 16, that was a while ago, man, and it wasn't like you had access to information like you have now. Like, how did you have the sense about you to make that deal? Do you know what I mean? Knowing the implications, or was it kind of guesswork back then?
No, it's still guesswork now. Let's be fucking honest.
I'm 10 years younger than you, right? So I'm 41, and like when I look back to like my early 20s and like looking at researching into steroids and drugs, admittedly, I didn't know anyone from that world, right? So I didn't have any kind of like anecdotes to come off of. I wouldn't have had the sense to know of the full implications to make a deal like that. But obviously,
there's a story-ish there. One, I had very good, possibly the gayest term that's lodged in my head. I had very good mentorship. I had very, very advanced, very, very intelligent, very, very interested parties around me that were able to offer me insights. And then secondly, the conversation we started with, to me, learning was a fucking job.
Yeah.
At age 12, I literally walked, I don't think I'm being hyperbolic, 3-4 kilometers to the bus station. Got on a bus, took the bus into the city, went from the city and walked and fucking wandered and fucking found a building called a library, and went into the library and found a big fucking box with meter-long drawers with little fucking cards, and ruffled through the fucking cards to find the card that represented the book that maybe they had, that maybe had all its pieces and pages, and maybe had the fucking information I wanted. And then I'd leave with a fucking bundle of fucking paper under my arms and go home and read this shit and make notes, furious fucking notes. And then it was on a clock because I had to take them back in a certain amount of time and make the fucking pilgrimage back to the fucking building. And give them to this fucking curmudgeon old bitchy woman that was mad that I wanted books about fucking steroids. And that was my job.
Yep.
My job was to go to school and suffer through the idiots at school, and then get home and read, and then leave. And then I got to leave there and go lift weights. And then I would come back and I would fucking read. And that was my job. And that was my purpose. And this is the part that confounds everybody. And it wasn't because I wanted to grow up and be a guru or be a fucking internet celebrity or any of that shit. It's because I wanted to fucking know there was shit out there that I didn't know, and that made me mad. That made me that made me furious. That's the whole reason I went to college, is because they knew the shit I needed to know. I didn't want to put up with their liberal, floppy dick, annoying fucking personalities and fucking wander their idiot halls. It was like a fucking cabal. They had the shit, and I had to get it. Sorry.
That is the secret sauce for learning.
Yeah, no, that really is.
That is.
One of the first things, the frustration,
fury.
that emotion, the anger of not being good enough and not knowing enough.
See, he had that. I had floppy disks, and you had like USBs, man. Just, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So back in my day, I had floppy disks at least at the uni.
It's just a different mode, but the emotion of not being good enough or not being smart enough or not being furious about your own ignorance is there.
So like, can we take like your, that is like so much experience, right? So much time under your belt doing all of this, and like this thirst for that knowledge that you're talking about. Can I ask you something like more specific in regards to like, let's say expectations that people have around the conversation of fertility? Because that's a big one when people are considering like steroids and things like that. Like, what's been your experience of like the myth or the stuff that's kind of passed around versus the reality of what you see for males and females?
It's hard to buy. Infertility is hard to buy. Again, I don't want to belittle the rare individual that has that problem, because that's a terrible, horrible problem. Apparently, a very emotional, disrupting. It's awful. I'm told. But I'm not by any stretch a paper waver. I'm not one of these people that looks up a paper and like, oh, look what I find. But there is a certain utility in looking at established statistics. What is the incidence of infertility in Gen Pop? Happens to be about 10%. That just is the number. It's just like being left-handed. It's about 15%. That seems to be the number baked into the fucking human genome. About 10% of people have low to infertility. You know what it is in athletics? Any guess?
About the same.
A little less.
Yeah.
About 8-9%.
Yeah.
So, know what athletes do? They take steroids. So is steroids causing infertility? Doesn't look like it.